Well, the introduction of new personal insolvency legislation late last year was described by Minister Alan Chatter at the time as the most radical reform since the foundation of the state. Thousands of people struggling with debt were expected to make use of the new arrangements in the first year. But 8 months after it first started accepting applications, only a tiny number of personal insolvency arrangements have been agreed with banks. So is it that the system is just getting off to a slow start, or was it a mistake to give the banks a veto over the process? We're going to be debating those issues in a few moments. First, though, our reporter Ethan O'Brien has been following one family's journey through the insolvency process over the past 6 months.
The introduction of personal insolvency legislation last year marked the possibility of a new dawn for ordinary people burdened by massive debt. Over that time, a number of people have come to a debt settlement arrangement with their creditors, but we know little about them. For the last 6 months, Primetime has been following one young family as they go through this process.
Like I said, no, it's not the most romantic thing to be talking about every night. I mean, you're worrying about how you're going to pay the bills.
This has been the greatest bit of hope we've gotten now in the last couple of years.
These people and people like them all over the country have no other hope, have no other choice.
Will personal insolvency give them the new start that they need, or will they be forced into bankruptcy? In 2008, Aidan and Noreen Fitzpatrick were working as a stonemason and as a hotel supervisor when they decided to borrow €280,000 from Ulster Bank for a house as they were expecting their first child. 6 months later, Aidan and then Noreen lost their jobs and they were struggling to pay the mortgage.
We didn't think it was going to be long-term. We wanted to obviously live there, and we were putting everything into the house. But it just happened so quick. We were unlucky. We bought just at the peak, and within 18 months or 2 years, everything crashed. So we tried to do deals about interest and stuff like this, and we had never been on social welfare in our lives. You see, I was working since I was in school. I went to college, and I left college. I got a job. I was in the bank before I took up my apprenticeship. And Noreen worked all through school and college. So we'd never been on the door before in our lives. So it was all new to us anyway.
After a year and a half of struggling, the couple realised that they couldn't pay the mortgage and their other personal loans anymore. After a lot of pressure from the bank, they decided to hand back the keys, thinking that would be the end of their problems. We
were getting the threatening letters and stuff, and I know it's only paper, but when it comes, I was never inside a courtroom in my life, but you're getting these threats of the sheriff and repossession and all this. So we got a meeting eventually with the bank, and we went in and we just said literally we can't pay anymore. We're barely surviving as it is, paying the utility bills and with a new baby. And this was obviously down the line. This is 2 years later nearly. Noreen was pregnant with Danny.
Yeah, it was very stressful. Really, now it was, especially when we weren't working then as well, and knowing that we'd have no house to live in when I was pregnant and having a new baby and stuff. We were under an awful lot of pressure. So in the end, we did give back the keys.
Stress was unbelievable. I mean, I said, no, it's not the most romantic thing to be talking about every night. You're worrying about how you're going to pay the bills. And it was just it was a nightmare. We put down a few rough years now, to be honest.
The family found a house to rent, but their troubles didn't end there. The bank sold a house they bought for €257,000 for just €60,000 and pursued the couple for €276,000 outstanding on the mortgage.
We were devastated at what they sold it for because of all the work that went into it. I mean,
there's no it
was unbelievable.
Yeah, it's not the people's fault who bought it. If you had the money, it was a great bargain, but to be sold for $60,000 after everything we put into it,
1, 2, 3. Things came to a head one Sunday morning last year when the couple got a summons to go to the High Court.
I mean, I never set foot in a courthouse in my life. It's just, it was shock, and when you actually see it in black and white, then that it's not even the bank now, it's their solicitors are suing us now for this, and then they add in that they're suing you for the costs and everything, and they're going, it's just all we kind of put it to the back of our mind for the last year because we were just dealing with the lower debts, and now it's all on top of us again, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to forget about it and carry on normal,
Santa coming, Danny. And we met.
And family members like Aidan's mother Hannah have been trying to help the couple as much as they can, as they've been through a tough few years.
it's very, very difficult, you know, that their priority is their family. They don't go out, you know, they don't do anything. And it's very difficult then, you know, to see and, you know, to stand by and, you know, there isn't that much we can do to help. We can be there, we can support them. But they're very good, like, they're great the way they keep their spirits up.
Last October, Aidan went to the Free Legal Aid Board for advice, but was told there was a long waiting list. Worried about what he could do next, he decided to ask personal insolvency practitioner John Butler for help.
Aidan was passing my window and he just saw that I was an insolvency practitioner. He came in and he asked me, could I do anything for him? So I explained the insolvency process to him, that he could possibly enter into an insolvency arrangement, which if he made some contribution as best he could to his creditors over a period of 5 years, that, well, he could come out the other end of this, theoretically he can come out the other end of this with no loan.
It's now November 2013 and Aidan and Noreen are hoping that this will be the last Christmas that they will be under that sort of financial pressure. They are working with John to see if they can get a debt settlement arrangement for those with unsecured loans.
Basically, we've completed our prescribed financial statement and we're ready to present it to the Insolvency Service, okay?
After that, they must wait for a court date to apply for a protective certificate.
And we're heading into Christmas. You know, I can't tell with regards to what availability there is with courts between now and Christmas, but I would hope that maybe in the new year we should have, sometime in January, we should have a protective certificate. Once the protective certificate is in place, I then have 70 days to put an arrangement in place that is suitable and agreeable to Aidan and Noreen. They seek independent legal advice on it. And I must call a creditors' meeting. The creditors' meeting, I have to basically see, can I get their agreement to accept what disposable income Aidan and Noreen have for them. Exactly.
But it's a gamble. Aidan and Noreen will only be able to pay their creditors a few euro a week. Even at that, it'll force them to live on less than what is defined as reasonable under the insolvency legislation.
You know, you can't get blood over stone. But he said, you're below the average living, you know, and he said, you're still willing to make sacrifice and pay them something. Now, I know it's pittance compared to what they're owed, but we're not running away from it, we're trying to offer them something. But so that's our next step. We're just hoping on, like with everything gone through, that when it comes to the creditors' meeting, that they're not totally heartless. Like.
It's purely down to the creditors' meeting, to put it bluntly. It's all going to hinge on a creditors' meeting. I don't know how that will happen. Maybe by the time you've stopped filming this, between what's happening with Aidan and Noreen, we'll all have a better insight into how that's going to progress. I'm not extremely optimistic for Aidan and Noreen at the moment, simply because the amount of money, as you can imagine, that they're going to give to their creditors over the next 5 years is going to be minuscule compared to what they owe them. So I don't hold out a lot of hope for the creditors accepting it. I do hope I'm proven wrong on that, though.
It's now February, and Noreen and Aidan, who's recovering from a hurling injury, are preparing to go to court to apply for their protective certificate.
We're feeling just a little bit nervous, but excited as well. We're hoping that it'll push things on faster for us, and we're hoping now everything goes well today.
As it's early days for the insolvency process, John must be present in the courtroom.
So, how did it go, John?
Very good. Very good. So we got our protective cert for both Aidan and Noreen today. So the judge was quite happy with things. He went through everything in detail and he okayed the certificate, so he's issued them today. So we now have 70 days to put an arrangement in place and go to their creditors and arrange, or put the arrangement to them and get an agreement that they will make a certain payment to them each month for the next 5 years. And at the end of 5 years, Aidan and Noreen will be totally discharged from their debts.
Was it a bit of a reality check going in there?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, went through all our history, so it was tough enough hearing that, and we're glad now we have the certificate. It was a bit tough now. We're just relieved it's over it. And just hoping to get to the next step now.
I'm hoping that the creditors will come to the table here and say, look, let's look at this for what it is. They haven't much to give us. They haven't got any assets. You know, they haven't got any income outside of what they're receiving from social welfare at the moment.
It's now April and it's the week of the creditors' meeting. Noreen and Aidan are hoping that their days of living under financial pressure might soon be coming to an end.
It's still a struggle every week. You just have to watch what we're doing, like, you know, trying to keep up with the payments, like, but our first priority every week is just to get the shopping done and
Bills.
try and keep on top of the bills and after that, like, but not easy, like, but once we keep track of it, we try and get the cheapest we can at the moment. I know this is going on 4 to 5 months, but this 4 to 5 years is hanging over us, like, I mean, since we lost our jobs and the house went and everything, like, but hopefully, like, it won't be much longer now, like.
But 3 days before the creditors' meeting, Ulster Bank contacted John to say that they would veto any insolvency arrangement for Aidan and Noreen.
From the credit unions could.
They voted by proxy. They never contacted me. They just sent in a proxy to say, look, we're not going to take it up. We're not going to do it. They voted no.
So how did they get that information to you? How did you find out?
By email.
Were you surprised at that? Because this is
I
all
was
new
shocked.
for you.
I rang them and I spoke to a lady in the insolvency unit, and basically she said, look, we've the power to do that.
It's the morning of the creditors' meeting. Even though Aidan and Noreen know that things are not going to work out for them today, as Ulster Bank, their main creditor, has said no, they are still hoping against hope that something will happen for them.
Even though we know the result, like, we're just hoping that there might be a turnaround, like, that hopefully they might change their minds and give us some positive news, like. But it doesn't look likely at the moment.
Half an hour later, John has the news.
Not too bad, not too bad. So, okay, the process is over. The arrangement is ended. All the other creditors, credit unions, AIB, all voted yes to accept the arrangement. It's basically the one bank here who said no, and they were the controller. They had the power to veto it, and they did veto it. Very sorry. I'm nearly as sorry as you are, but I know you're sorry that that it's happened this way. The power is out of our hands. They have all the power here, and they have used it. What's left for us now, the next route is bankruptcy. And
Why didn't you go for bankruptcy in the first place?
well, if you do go in for bankruptcy, the judge will ask you, have you been to a personal insolvency practitioner to see, can you go down the insolvency route first? Basically, if you have something to give to your creditors, it's better than nothing, because that's what people get in bankruptcy, is nothing. Aidan and Noreen have nothing to give to anybody else now in this arrangement. It'll be over in one day in court. They'll be supervised for 3 years, every 6 months, and they'll just have to be supervised that if their circumstances change financially, they still have their reasonable living expenses to live on, and in 3 years they'll be fully discharged from their debts.
We thought this was going to be the end of it, like, it's been a long road now, like, but you know, so just like, basically we were hoping that they'd accept it, like, it was the best we could do. We were even sacrificing to try and come up with that, like, but and John himself, I'd say, was and John's dad's putting a lot of work into it too, like, and he was saying this is the best they could get, like, but so we were a bit deflated now the other day, like, but look, we're just going to take the next step now, and we're going to go out to bankruptcy now.
And for Aidan's mother, Hannah, the outcome has been disappointing.
And now having to go through the High Court, none of us wants to go to court. Having to go through, deal with all of that. And when you have nothing to give, that's very difficult. We're used to paying our way. If they could have avoided being in this situation, they would. I suppose maybe in the long term they will be better off, but it just doesn't sit right.
Aidan's mother there, finishing off Ethan O'Brien's report. Well, Ulster Bank have given us a statement tonight. They say Ulster Bank rejected the recently offered sum of €2,000 under a debt settlement arrangement as it represents less than 1% of the amount owed. In our opinion, the long-term position of the customer will improve, and as such, this does not represent a reasonable offer in full and final settlement. However, Ulster Bank will be happy to re-engage with these customers to examine an alternative proposal. We did actually ask Ulster Bank, and indeed we asked all the banks, for a representative to take part in our programme tonight, but none was available. We also asked the Minister for Justice to join us, but Minister Shatter wasn't available to us either. We are joined, however, by Lorcan O'Connor, Director Designate of the Insolvency Service of Ireland, so thank you for being here, Lorcan. And you too, Nolene Blackwell, DG of FLAC. First of all, Lorcan, I mean, just looking at that story there of Aidan and Noreen, what is the point in respect of your service if Ulster Bank just decided at the end of the day, forget about it?
It is difficult to watch. Certainly that couple are precisely the kind of people that the reform to personal insolvency legislation were in mind to help as it was introduced, and it's clearly frustrating for that couple to have gone through the process and get to nowhere. But I am encouraged to hear that they do intend to avail of bankruptcy, and part of our challenge, our job, is to ensure that the stigma to bankruptcy doesn't persist into the future, and they will certainly on the day one of bankruptcy have all of their debts written off, all of that burden removed, and they can be assured
go back
of
to
a professional and compassionate dealings within the ISI in relation to
But then you're more or
bankruptcy.
less saying, Lorcan, or accepting that personal insolvency is a complete waste of time.
I don't believe so. There's obviously particular circumstances for that case, but broadly speaking, there's an economic rationale.
But if the banks can just veto, Lorcan, if the banks can come along after all the work and the years the couples go through with their PIPs and just say at the end of the day, sorry, by email, we're vetoing this, what is the point of it?
But those kind of voting mechanisms exist in other countries and they're not a barrier. The reason they aren't a barrier is that economic rationale dictates that banks should engage in these processes. It's clearly a learning curve. Some of the banks aren't engaging. That's been despite best efforts of the ISI, Central Bank, Department of Finance and others. Clearly something does need to be done to ensure that there is meaningful engagement, but as time goes by, one would like to think that we will act like any other
statistics. Let's talk about a few statistics.
Market.
How many successful insolvency arrangements have you actually managed to succeed in achieving?
We produced quarterly statistics at the end of March, and the numbers were particularly low. We had only just over 50 arrangements. In the months since then, we have doubled that.
Personal insolvency arrangements?
Well, arrangements
relating
in
to
totality.
family homes?
Back at we're now only in double figures of personal insolvency arrangements.
11, I think, is it?
Slightly more than that. It's increasing almost day by
12?
day now. I think we're in the high teens, but look, I would accept fully that that's a drop in the ocean.
Right.
And I would accept
you
fully
wouldn't
that
win an award for it.
We wouldn't win an award for it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the numbers that we're looking at now is different to maybe the experience in other countries when you brought in reform of the legislation.
Okay, and I can see you're trying to do your job,
Lorcan. The trend is pointing to larger numbers as we go forward.
How many have been blocked by the banks? Like we saw there, how many have been blocked by the banks?
I don't know precisely the number at this point in time, but the majority of cases have successfully gone through the process. But clearly that's something that we will be keeping a close eye on, and if we do identify a trend that continues, we obviously need to see what can be done to address that.
So are people therefore not even bothering to go through the process? I mean, is word of mouth that there's no point because at the end of the day their bank will just veto it, and there will have been months and years of stress for nothing at the end of it?
I hope that's not the situation, because I would encourage viewers out there who are having difficulties at the moment in paying their debts to engage with the personal insolvency practitioner. The bottom line is that
they won't feel confident, Lorcan, after watching their story.
But the bottom line is that practitioner will be able to solve their problem through one avenue or another, and that is ultimately, I suppose, what most are looking for, a second chance and a return to solvency.
Okay, and then I'll ask you that simple question again. You're obviously doing your best, you're running this insolvency agency, but if the banks just veto it, as we saw in Ethna's film there, what is the point in your service? You cannot succeed.
Well, the Insolvency Service manages a whole breadth
but focusing on the family home, the mortgages.
But I think if you were to look, for example, at the Governor of the Central Bank before the Oireachtas last week, he also described the position articulated by some creditors as wholly unsatisfactory. But he also suggested that they will change their position quickly, simply because of what the economic rationale dictates that they should.
Nolene, do you think the banks will change their position? What do you think of the current arrangements and system?
the banks don't have to do anything unless they feel like it. It is no fault of the Insolvency Service of Ireland, which is a regulation system, a registration system, an administrative system. But the truth is, Lorcan can't know, and none of us can know, how many cases are being blocked by the banks, because they don't come to him until they're ready to put together a proposal. And an awful lot of people know that their main lender will block their proposal. And the other thing that's a real problem is that the insolvency structure as it stands has a whole heap of steps through to it, as you saw in that thing there. So it wasn't only just that they were blocked at the end, but that the couple had to go through so much difficulty all along the way. They handed their house back without knowing that they were going to be left with the residual debt because they couldn't get access to whatever legal services they might have needed at that time to advise them. Not our service, the Legal Aid Board is a state-funded service with big delays. That's not us, but it does have big delays. So they didn't know that when they did it. Then they went through a system where they didn't know, and they had to go through a whole lot of hurdles. So the system that's there is extremely cumbersome. And even before you get to the stage of the bank blocking, it's very hard to negotiate with your lender while you're still in your house. You can lose your house. And then the insolvency system is run by private insolvency practitioners. Those practitioners are private and have to be paid themselves. Fair dues to John. It seems to me he was working with the couple for whatever could be got. But at the same time, it is a system that's privatised.
Let me bring in one of those. So it's Ronan Duffy. I think you negotiated, Ronan, the very first PIA. Do you think the system works, Ronan?
There has been some teething problems, but I think that's only inevitable when we introduce a new legislation like we have. I think I am optimistic that the system, whilst it is addressing those teething problems, and I would remain confident that sort of long term it will work.
And Isel Cody, what's your own view on that? Isel?
I think the legislation in itself is innately flawed. And it precludes people from wanting to engage with the service. Because why are you going to bother going to the effort of going to a PIP, going through the process, only to discover that one creditor can instantly say no and you're back to square one?
And one more point and then I'll go.
When a creditor says no, it's the job of the PIP to challenge that, understand that and reverse it. And in every single case where a creditor has rejected, we have been able to reverse the decision.
John obviously tried that
I appreciate that,
and it didn't work.
But there is, as Lorcan said, there is a commercial rationale, and we have been able to reverse every single decision that we have, rejection that we've received.
Isel?
Well, while I'm delighted to hear that you have been able to do that, in reality that's not going to happen in every situation. And from what we could hear in Aidan and Noreen's story, it seems that they had the positive engagement from most of their creditors. But one inevitably has stopped the process.
Okay, I'm going to throw it back to Lorcan, but John is looking at me and John is involved. So if we can get the mic, sorry about that, guys, to John, what's your own response to that?
Well, I did approach Ulster Bank and I asked them, you know, is there anything you want me to change in the arrangement? And they said no, that they would prefer to proceed with a judgment against Aidan and Noreen. And I just couldn't understand that.
So you've tried your best?
Oh, I did. I tried umpteen times.
I'm going to just throw that to Lorcan and come back to you. And it's Lorcan to give you a fair right of reply to that.
Well, I think clearly it's not for me to comment on a particular case, but to go back to Ronan's point, the bottom line is what is the bank's return in a situation. So just to give you one example of why I believe it would be in the interest of banks to engage. Let's say somebody has a mortgage of €300,000 and the practitioner, through term extensions, adjustments to interest rates and other work, can get to a position where the debtor can service 200,000 of that mortgage. That means that a practitioner will ask the bank to write off €100,000. Now, if the bank says no, that case is likely to go bankrupt. Now, what if that house is only worth 100? That means then the bank has to write off 200 in that situation, having walked away from a situation when they would only have to write off 100. So there won't be every case that requires debt being written off. A lot of them can be solved through other means, but where it is required, again, a PIA offers a better return to banks, to creditors, than bankruptcy.
I'll take one more comment, then I'll go to the break. This man here.
The reality is that people need to take control here. And if you go in to enter into a personal insolvency arrangement, you lose control. If you look at bankruptcy, you are in control. The bank is not in control. They cannot oppose it. They can't do anything else. So if anyone's out there thinking of handing in their home, the keys of their home today, don't. Go and get some professional advice about bankruptcy, because that's where the control is. That's what people need to understand.
I'm going to come back and discuss more of that. I just need to take a break because I know lots of my audience want to talk. I promise I'll come back. Join us in a few moments just after the break. Welcome. Are you Paul? Welcome back to the programme. We're discussing personal insolvency. Brendan Burgess, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, in every other country, the resolution for people who don't pay their mortgage is that the house is fairly quickly repossessed and sold on. We have a system in this country where the banks engage, and where people engage with their banks. In 90% of cases, they get a solution, whether it's a split mortgage or an economic concession or something like that. There's something very unusual about Aidan and Noreen's case, something very unusual, and I don't know we're getting the full story from that VT. First of all, they handed back the keys. The advice everybody should be given is you don't hand back the keys, you try and do a deal with your bank. And most people, if they go to a debt advisor or even a personal insolvency practitioner, they should first of all try and resolve it outside the informal process. In most cases, where a borrower has simply got a home with a bank, if the bank offers them a deal, an informal deal, which they reject, why would they then approve a deal? So I would say that there's probably more logic to Ulster Bank vetoing that deal than appears from that actual VT.
Nolan, just on the broader issue as well of Brendan saying it's not that hard if you go in a certain way about it.
No, well, first of all, as Brendan knows, in some places, if you hand back your home, that's the end of your debt. In Ireland, handing back your home doesn't even mean that the mortgage debt is cleared. You're left with an unsecured debt, which was exactly the problem that Aidan and Noreen found themselves in. But I do think I need to say something about the commercial advantage that everybody sees to the banks doing deals. They are not doing the deals. Brendan, you are right that some people are getting resolutions. An awful lot of people, and the people we meet in FLAC, are not getting resolutions. They are getting chaotic, uncoordinated, illogical suggestions from their banks, and they do not have they are not given reasons why things are not happening right. They don't know why they're not getting decent solutions, and the systems that are there, including bankruptcy, these are nuclear options.
Yeah, for a lot of people.
Everything.
Okay, no,
it's like saying divorce. If you're having a row with your partner, divorce isn't the solution. What a solution would be a much earlier connection.
Okay, let me get the MAB's point of view.
There's really only two solutions, really. It's either a voluntary arrangement or bankruptcy, because really people can't afford anything else. And I was just wondering maybe that the central bank should be present here this evening, because I think the culture of the banking industry has not changed. And I think, you know, it was illustrated here this evening, a person going right, at least on what we heard, a person went right through the whole process, and at the end, the bank comes back in and says, can we do a deal? So that deal should be done at the outset and not at the end.
I'll bring you back. Lorcan, do we need legislation so the banks can't veto it?
Well, I think certainly we need to keep under review the legislation to see whether or not it is effective. But
it doesn't look effective at the moment, Lorcan.
However, I know there's a number of PIPs in the audience, some of whom have had cases actually concluded, and others who have already turned around initial rejections from creditors into positive acceptances. We do need a meaningful statistical sample size before we can make an assessment. But I think certainly the ISI, in consultation with the Minister for Justice, in consultation with Department of Finance, Central Bank, will keep this closely under review. And if changes are needed, there is a commitment there to make any.
But I mean, can I just say, no, we heard Bank of Ireland. I mean, they've said they're going to veto it. They're just not going to sign up to this.
And equally, when they deal with it on a case-by-case basis, rather than stating what their blanket policy is, the economic equation will simply say it is in their interest to vote yes. They do it in the UK in relation to the Bank of Ireland UK enterprise. There's no reason why they shouldn't be doing it here.
Do you think there should be a veto, by the way? Celine, I know you're from the credit unions.
I am indeed, yes. I don't believe that the banks should have the capacity to pass a veto. I think at the end of the day, the banks were very irresponsible in the first place in giving out the mortgages that they gave out. And I think it's interesting that Ulster Bank commented there that they would be happy to re-engage with the couple. I'm at a complete loss as to why they didn't engage with the couple before they had to even go down the personal insolvency road. And I think that it's incumbent on the central bank to put pressure on the banks to re-engage with people.
Miriam, I think that the banks, they have a double veto, really, in my view. They have a veto, obviously, of whether you go into the arrangement or not. And then they can actually sort of, at the end of the 3-year period, I think they can make representations that it would continue out to 8 years. I'm surprised that people are surprised that the banks exercise a veto. If I had a veto, I'd do it. Why wouldn't you?
That's a fair point, isn't it? Unless there's legislation to stop them having a veto, why wouldn't they use it?
Well, again, the legislation has been developed with reference to best practice all around the world, and these kind of voting mechanisms do work. They work on the corporate side here in Ireland for many years in relation to creditors' meetings, at liquidations, at examinerships, and so on. So the concept does work elsewhere. Clearly, there are certain banks at the moment adopting an approach that is not satisfactory, is not acceptable. We have to see whether or not that will be maintained or whether common sense will prevail.
What about in other countries? They have like a public insolvency expert, someone who could be like an independent in the middle, could decide whether or not this is a fair veto or not. Would that work?
Well, I understand, while we obviously within the ISI don't set policy, there are certain constitutional challenges here in relation to doing that. But in terms of a public insolvency practitioner, there are a number of practitioners who have stated quite publicly that they are not charging upfront fees. So nobody should fear contacting a practitioner simply because they don't have the wherewithal to pay fees.
I'm conscious as well that this couple share their story with us tonight. Ulster, thank you for doing that, because it's always a hard thing to do. Ulster Bank have more or less left a little chink of window open tonight. Does that give you any hope?
No, I think it's only a PR stunt. Like, I mean, we wouldn't sacrifice what living below reasonable means as it is. We wouldn't sacrifice something for them. We were never given options from day one. Yet they seem, intent on crushing us and getting a judgment against us in the courts. Like, whereas if they accepted the arrangement, we were willing to sacrifice for. I know it's just pittance, but they were getting something. I mean.
Okay, one last word to you, John.
Yeah, I mean, we're all paying extra USC charges, and we're maybe taking a hit in our income, all to bail the banks out when they were in trouble. But we didn't do it to pursue people like this. I certainly don't think we did anyway.
Yeah, fair enough. I want to give Lorcan one last point to you. Lorcan, if there are people watching at home tonight and they're in dire straits and they're really worried, what should they do? Is it worth going to for personal insolvency, or are they wasting their time?
It absolutely is. A personal insolvency practitioner will be able to identify a solution that brings them back to solvency and gives them that fresh start.
Listen, thanks so very much. I know everyone here wants to speak. I promise I'll come back to you. I promise I will on another occasion, but now it's Claire.